Right now, you are doing something no other creature on Earth does the way you do it. You are turning thoughts into sounds, and those sounds are landing in another mind and becoming thoughts again. You've been doing this so long it feels like breathing. But the real story of how the first language was born is far stranger than anything the words themselves can easily describe. Here's the first thing to understand. Language didn't appear. It evolved slowly across a time span so vast that even the word slowly barely captures it. There was no moment when the first word was spoken. No day when silence became speech. What happened instead was a series of tiny, compounding shifts across hundreds of thousands of years. Each one so small, it would have been invisible to anyone living through it, and yet each one building towards something entirely new. Start with what your ancestors had before language. Not nothing. They had calls, grunts of alarm, sounds of pleasure, distress, and warning. Other primates have this too, a fixed repertoire of vocalizations tied to specific situations. A vervet monkey has distinct alarm calls for eagle, snake, and leopard, each one triggering a different response in listeners. But those calls are not language. They are signals, not symbols. A vervet monkey cannot combine its eagle call and its snake call to produce a brand new meaning. It cannot talk about a leopard it saw yesterday or a snake it expects to see tomorrow. The signal only means one thing, and it only works in the present. What made human language different was the step from signal to symbol. A symbol is a sound that doesn't just trigger a response, it represents a thing, even when the thing isn't present. The word fire means fire whether you're standing next to a fire, describing one from last night, or warning about one you're afraid is coming. Linguist and cognitive scientist Steven Pinker has argued that this capacity for symbolic representation, for connecting arbitrary sounds to shared meanings, is the cognitive leap that separates human language from every other communication system on Earth. The leap wasn't in the throat, it was in the brain. So when did the brain make that leap? Archaeologist and cognitive scientist Richard Wrangham and others studying early human development have pointed to fire as a turning point, not just for diet and survival, but for social behavior. Controlled fire, emerging somewhere between 1 and 2 million years ago, changed how early humans spent their evenings. Instead of sleeping immediately after dark to avoid predators, small groups could gather around a fire, safe, warm, and awake for hours. Those long evening hours created new social pressure, new need for coordination, new opportunities for the kind of complex communication that would eventually become language. This isn't direct evidence of language, but it's a compelling structural argument. You need the social context before you can build the social tool. The physical equipment for language came in pieces. The descended larynx, which positions the human voice box lower in the throat than in other primates, allows humans to produce a vastly wider range of distinct sounds, but also means humans are the only mammals that can easily choke on food. Evolution doesn't trade off safety for no reason. That anatomical risk suggests the vocal benefits were significant. Researchers studying fossil hyoid bones, the small U-shaped bone that anchors the muscles involved in speech, have found versions resembling the modern human form in Neanderthals dating back at least 60,000 years, suggesting that at least some capacity for complex vocalization predates modern humans entirely. But the physical equipment is only half the story. Language also required a new kind of social understanding. The ability to recognize that another mind exists, has different knowledge than yours, and can be deliberately informed or deceived. Developmental psychologist Michael Tomasello, who has spent decades studying the cognitive differences between humans and other great apes, has identified what he calls shared intentionality as the key ingredient. Chimpanzees understand goals and can learn by observation, but they don't spontaneously point things out to each other simply to share information. Human infants do this from around 12 months old, pointing at things not because they want them, but simply because they want another person to look at them too. That impulse to share attention, not just to want something, but to want someone else to know what you know, is the social engine that drives language into existence. Think about what this means for the first words. They weren't commands. They weren't warnings. They were probably closest to what we now call joint attention, Sounds that meant something like "look at that." The crucial invention wasn't the word for food or danger. It was the word that means "I want you to see what I see." From that foundation, everything else could be built. Names, actions, relations, time, abstraction, story. Here's the twist. Language may have been its own greatest accelerant. Researchers studying the relationship between language and thought have found that language doesn't just describe ideas that already exist. It creates the conditions for ideas that couldn't otherwise form. Psychologist Lyra Boroditsky, whose work examines how language shapes perception and memory, has shown that the categories a language provides genuinely affect how its speakers perceive and remember the world. Once early humans could name a concept, they could hold it in memory more reliably, share it with others, and build on it. Language didn't just communicate human thought. It expanded the range of thoughts humans could have. So the first language wasn't a single invention. It was a convergence. The right anatomy, the right social environment, the right cognitive architecture, and a feedback loop in which each new communicative success made the next one easier. By the time something we'd recognize as true language emerged, perhaps 70 to 100,000 years ago, based on archaeological evidence of symbolic thinking, it had been building for hundreds of thousands of years. The explosion of art, tools, and long-distance trade that archaeologists find at that period wasn't the cause of language. It was the first visible sign of what language had already quietly made possible. Right now, you are doing something no other creature on Earth does the way you do it, and you've been doing it so naturally for so long that you have almost certainly never once stopped to ask where the whole thing came from.